to have this safe environment. It's everyone who travels on the network is kind of responsible.
Welcome to Talking Shop, the Communities Inc. podcast. Episode 15, How Safe is Public Transport?
Hi Andy, welcome to our podcast. Good to have you here. Do you want to just start off by telling us, who you are, what you do, and some of your background?
Yes, happy to. Thank you for inviting me. Really pleased to be here. So my name is Professor Andy Newton. I am a Professor of Criminology and Policing at Nottingham Trent University. In terms of my background, actually about 25 years ago, I did a PhD which was funded by Merseytravel, who are the passenger transport executive for Merseyside. So it was a PhD to help them understand the nature of crime on buses, looking at bus routes and bus shelter damage, and try and help them with a kind of evidence-informed approach in terms of how they better kind of target their resources and look at ways to prevent crime on public transport. And since then I've been kind of in this space for quite a long time. So I've done work with Transport for London, British Transport Police, a number of kind of city safe partnerships. I've done some kind of European work with someone called DG Move, who are the Directorate General for Mobility and Transport. So that's kind of sort of kind of Home Office and Department of Transport, but across the kind of pan-EU. So I've done kind of stuff at national level, but I've done stuff quite locally with kind of cities and communities as well. And I'm currently an academic advisor to the Notts and Nottinghamshire Violence Reduction Partnership as well. So that kind of helps kind of building those local links with the university.
Right, brilliant. So what are some of the issues then with public transport? What are some of the issues that you've been studying and that you come across?
So a lot of the work I do looks at kind of crime patterns, when and where crime happens, where it kind of peaks, where the kind of problems are. And I guess one of the issues is that unlike kind of studying, burglary at a house, the buses and trams move about the city, so that's a bit more challenging in terms of understanding when and where the problems are. But for the general part, crime on public transport is it's reflective of that kind of general environment. So kind of buses, trams that go through higher crime areas tend to absorb and pick up higher crime, and also that changes by day of week, season, school day, non-school days, evenings. Different crime problems at kind of peak time versus kind of quieter times as well. So there's just some of the sort of general kind of areas around it.
And does it vary across different types of public transport? Are there specific issues around some types of public transport that doesn't exist elsewhere? Or
I think there's some kind of differences between kind of sort of the rail and the sort of bus network, as it were, because the bus stops more locally, stops more frequently. It's more of a kind of localised, whereas the rail kind of connects urban places, connects different cities. It's longer, even the kind of local trains. I think about Derbyshire through to Nottingham, stopping in kind of Beeston, and it's a much broader kind of area that it picks up. So that's slightly different. But the crime problems aren't kind of unique. What happens on a bus tends to happen on rail. I think people's fear and perception sometimes is slightly different as well.
Yeah, I think I've always thought trains are maybe safer because the British Transport Police, they've got their number and you sort of call it or you can text it and they'll be there at the next station. So, there's nobody's going to be getting off until that train stops at the next station. So I guess I've sort of always got a bit of a perception that maybe the train is a bit safer in terms of getting help. Obviously, there's that time that it takes for the train to stop. That might be another half an hour or so.
Yeah, and I think most people would probably think about that. But then also, if you're on a carriage, on a train carriage, the driver might be 6 carriages ahead, whereas a bus driver is actually generally closer and can see what's happening. So in some extent, that it's different settings and different, and I think the other thing is that once you're on that vehicle, you're kind of captive to it, as it were. So if you kind of were walking down the street and you saw something that you felt, I'm not sure I want to go down that street, it makes me feel a bit unsafe, then you might turn around and go. Once you're on a bus or once you're on a train, that's kind of it. And every time it stops, a new group of people get on and get off, and that kind of changes some sort of kind of how you feel and levels of risk sometimes. So it's kind of that kind of input and output of people continuously on a system that you don't kind of have control of, whereas you would if you were walking or on a bike or in a car, you can kind of go, actually, I'm not going to go that way. So it's
I guess it's about reading each individual situation, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely, and trying to find ways to help kind of, well, both improve, reduce kind of likelihood of crime, but also increase perceptions of safety, and they don't always match either.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, we've been doing hate crime awareness training since 2013. When the result of the EU referendum came, you know, we heard that there'd been an increase in reported hate crimes, increase of 30% nationally, 100% in Dorset, you know, increases in Nottinghamshire and Essex. A lot of those incidents that were taking place were in the public arena, and a lot were actually on public transport. And I think if I remember rightly, the National Hate Crime Strategy at the time was updated to bear in mind, you know, the nighttime economy, public transport in relation to hate crime. What's the situation in relation to hate crime now in terms of, you know, I know we're 8 years on, is that still an issue on public transport? Because we saw those videos emerging, didn't we, from social media, people being rude and disrespectful, sometimes even physical attacks. Does that still happen, or is it less so?
I think it does still happen. I think, again, I think what happens on transport is always reflective of where society is, and where you see those spikes in hate crime, you know, more generally, where you've got those kind of unsupervised sort of environments and people are close together. And I mean, there was a PhD a couple of years ago at Leicester, and actually they found that, in a strange way, that people who were kind of disabled were being victims of hate crime, but rather than people speaking out and actually stopping it, people actually kind of joined in and were encouraged to kind of, it was this kind of perverse situation. And I think because there was no kind of guardianship, there was no one saying, no, that's not okay, we need to stop that, it almost came this kind of inverted sort of situation. So, you know, I think we're always going to get spikes, and I think sometimes, particularly the bus environment, that can, I haven't seen anything of it being a particular problem at the moment, but I think, you know, I don't think it's stopped. I think it's perhaps, you know, the media's more focused on violence against women and girls at the moment, and so I think that's where the kind of the context and some of the kind of policy focus is. Yeah. So I think that's where people are kind of aware of, and the media reporting is, unfortunately. But I don't think it's gone away. I think it's just maybe not focused on as much as we might hear.
Yeah. Has there been any research around different groups of people and their confidence or feelings of safety on public transport? Or
yeah, I mean, internationally there's been quite a lot of research, and there are kind of particular groups who tend to feel vulnerable or don't feel safe using transport. So the elderly often feel unsafe using public transport. Women and girls, particularly when it's dark, particularly at night. Disabled users, LGBTQ+ groups, they tend to feel, certainly they do kind of experience high levels, and they often use kind of one or two techniques. So they'll have some kind of precautionary behaviour, maybe travel with kind of a rape alarm kind of thing, or have some kind of mechanism, or travel with friends. Or they'll kind of avoid situations, so they won't travel at certain times, they'll avoid certain places, and they kind of become excluded from parts of society because of it. So, and I think there was a recent report that even said that, you know, there's women and girls who can't drive, and so they're actually kind of excluded from jobs because they just won't travel on public transport. So actually, there's a hit to the economy on that as well, you know, and so it's, you know, it is an issue. I mean, thankfully, rates are quite low, but it is kind of an issue, I think.
So apart from individuals maybe, you know, trying to take some personal responsibility in being safer, are any of the public transport providers doing anything that maybe enhances that feeling of confidence and safety for those vulnerable groups?
I mean, I think that the idea is to kind of make it safer by being safer for everyone. But sometimes the messages might be tailored. I mean, you know, I think most buses, trams, trains now have CCTV. Yeah. You know, in not specifically, there was quite a big piece of work recently around the A to Z of consent. So there's been a drive locally for that. There are times when they do joined up operations. So if the police are aware of a problem, then they'll do some joined up kind of fare evasion and kind of kind of patrolling along sort of bus routes or tram routes. Transport for London, British Transport Police more broadly have done quite a lot of work around the kind of Project Guardian and Report It to See It. So that kind of that kind of encouraging people to report incidents, particularly of unwanted sexual behaviour, which, you know, I think levels of under-reporting are sort of at least 30, 40 times lower than the actual nature of the incident. And you know, you might have seen the kind of videos, would you report it now, would you report it now, as the guy gets closer and closer to the woman. And I think that kind of drive to kind of encourage people to report is really important. But then again, if they don't have a feedback loop, if they don't feel like anything's being done, then that motivation to record kind of and report kind of drops off. So it's important that people are informed about what's been done. But you've reported it, we've done this, this is what's happened, you know, and that doesn't always track through, and the process is slow as well. So you know, that's really challenging.
I think a lot of the time, you know, there is something happening in the background, but it's that failure to communicate that. And as you say, if it takes a long time, it might take a while for that feedback to come through. You mentioned the A to Z of consent in Nottingham. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
It was a media campaign around informed sexual consent more broadly, but they put a lot of kind of posters, leaflets, campaigns on the buses, on the trams, just to kind of get that message out more broadly. And it wasn't specific to public transport, but it was obviously, they used that as a means of kind of communicating to kind of a wide audience around that. So I think it was a really important campaign.
So, I mean, you're from an academic background. I mean, could you give us some examples of how, you know, maybe some of the work that you've been involved in, or how academic studies can influence sort of real life sort of public policy, or examples of how it has done?
Yeah, so slightly different, but we did some work around theft and pickpocketing on the rail with British Transport Police. And one of the challenges is quite often somebody doesn't know when and where they were pickpocketed. They know the start and the end of the journey, and they know the start and the end time, but actually, you know, they've been, you know, this was on London. It could have been across 8 tube stops by that. So what we did was some, I won't go into statistics, but some kind of models around probabilities to try and narrow down likely journeys and where it was, and we could help BTP narrow down where it was likely that, and they actually built this into their kind of crime reporting system that they have, so they can look online at where pickpocketing's more likely to be, and then help target their operations around that. So we did some work with that. With Merseytravel, we did some reports, work around just reporting forms for drivers, actually, because I think there was about 50 bus operators, they all had a different reporting form. It all came in on paper 20 years ago, and so actually it was really hard to kind of get that consistent, whereas you had one form that someone could then fill out, enter, and it could be used for health and safety and to help Merseytravel understand which routes. And, you know, I think something like, when I looked at the nature of the problem, I think something like 50% of the problem happened on about 10 of the routes or something, and then we could narrow that down. So actually, as you started to understand that kind of concentration of the problems, you know, and also it was happening at particular times of day in particular locations, you can really help sort of target resources. But you know, that relies on having the appropriate data to start to tackle it. The thing I'm really keen as well is to kind of think how academia can kind of co-create solutions. So not necessarily on public transport, but there's been a lot of work on parks recently. You know, parks have been designed by males for users who are generally women and girls and children, and actually there's been work around co-designing, co-creating parks with communities, with the user groups. And I think with public transport we can think about, you know, how we design buses or stops to kind of help make them safer as well.
So you were talking about the standardisation of that reporting. Would that be useful if that was done on a national basis in terms of the consistent data that would generate?
I think it's something that is important. So if we think about the fragmented nature of the public transport system, British Transport Police are responsible for what happens on the rail, and then each of the police forces, the kind of 43 police forces, are kind of responsible for what happens locally on buses or on the trams. So actually you've got already 2 different systems in operation, and then, you know, that things move across between police forces. But the piece of work I'm doing at the minute is with someone called the Connected Places Catapult, which is trying to bring industry and academia quite a bit closer together, and it's around what a national database on VAWG, on violence against women and girls, might look like. And the reason I think it's important is because we quite often focus on transport as being the journey, what happens when you're on a bus, what happens when you're on a train, but actually there's other environments. There's that waiting particularly waiting for a bus, waiting for a tram, where you're actually in the public environment, and that's, people don't sometimes think of that as part of the transport journey. Beyond that, and the really challenging bit is you've got to walk to the stop or to the station, and that's actually part of your whole journey.
Yeah.
And quite often, you wouldn't think of that and report that as part of your transport journey. You just report it in terms of the local area you were at, and actually that's a really problem, because we know from a lot of research that actually being the victim of a crime or knowing someone else that's been a victim of a crime is one of the biggest obstacles to then using public transport. So if your actual experience is on the way to the bus stop and then you stop using the bus because of it, then it kind of becomes a circular problem, because we want more people on the buses and the trains to help feel safer. I mean, there's different issues with theft and pickpocketing, but generally busier places help people feel safer, and so if people aren't using the system, then that's problematic. So but it's kind of really challenging with kind of multiple bus operators, multiple regulators, the rail, the tram. So it's quite challenging to kind of build that in. But I think it's a really important piece of work. And it was there was 13 recommendations that came out of the DFT, Transport for West Midlands, priorities for making women and girls safer on public transport. And this was one of the 13. But it was a kind of long-term priority, and I'm trying to push it to a more immediate kind of, if we don't know all the pieces of the jigsaw, then how can we kind of respond to the problem? So we're trying to work through that, but it's a real challenge. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about it. I mean, times when I've not felt safe is when I've been waiting for a bus and there's nobody else around. So when somebody else then comes around, that's where the potential, and it's actually when the bus comes or when the train comes, there's a relief that, oh, okay, and when you're on, or when I'm on, I felt a lot safer.
And technologies can start to help with that. And obviously technology sometimes is a hindrance, because people rely on the technology, and actually what we need are people. But sometimes, the live real-time bus feeds, for example, it's not just the bus is scheduled to come in 3 minutes or 6 minutes, but actually the bus is 3 minutes away. My phone tells me the bus is 3 minutes away, and if I leave now, I'm going to arrive, and I'm only going to be at the bus stop for 30 seconds. A minute. It's rather than having to wait 10 minutes and then the bus is 30 minutes late and you're stood there for 40 minutes. And
I have to say, I mean, some of those waiting environments aren't particularly pleasant. They can be very poorly lit, quite desolate. So, I mean, I won't mention any, but some of them are quite scary places to be around, even if there are other people.
And sometimes actually because of the inclement weather, and young people need somewhere to hang out and do stuff, that the bus shelter is the place that's dry. So you get groups of young children or kids that aren't doing anything wrong but can add to perceptions of feelings of safety as well. So it's quite challenging for them.
So what's the feel in Nottingham then? What's public transport like in Nottingham? How does it compare to the rest of the country?
So there's real challenges in terms of that kind of statistics, because of reporting and underreporting and what's happening. But I had a quick look just to see. So Notts as a city its crime rate is about 110 crimes per 1,000 people. So that's slightly lower than Nottingham, than Manchester or Birmingham. It's slightly higher than Sheffield. Right. And again, the crime rate on the transport is kind of quite similar. So Nottingham Station had, I think, 110 crimes last year, but there's 3.5 million passengers during the year. So if you think about your chances of being a victim, it's actually really low. And the public transport is generally quite a safe environment. But when incidents can happen, then sometimes there is a challenge for kind of the response, for kind of police to get there or for people to kind of be made aware of it. So, incidents can be quite serious, unfortunately, but it's not particularly an area that, it's not something that I would say, you're really unsafe travelling on transport in Nottingham, or it's any different to any other. And obviously you've got rural, city kind of towns, so there's variations obviously there as well, and we tend to sometimes focus on the city and forget about the rural network as well. So there's those variations, but I wouldn't suggest that there's any major problems in Nottingham. Right. At the same time, I wouldn't say it's any kind of any reasons why it's much safer than anywhere else either. I think it's transport's reflective of the kind of cities and urban spaces or rural spaces that it's in, and crime problems tend to be reflective of that. So
So who's responsible for keeping passengers safe in Nottingham then? Is there a single agency or is it a partnership?
No, so it has to be a partnership approach. So British Transport Police are responsible for policing the rail network, and they are funded differently to police forces. So British Transport Police are funded by the tickets. So that's a separate kind of organisation that's dedicated to policing the rail environment. If you're on the bus or the tram, then the responsibility is with kind of Nottinghamshire Police, but obviously that needs to be in partnership with Nottingham Trams, with NET, with the bus operators, with Not City, with Nottinghamshire Council, with community safety partners. But actually, it's everyone's responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just that, you know, to have this safe environment, it's everyone who travels on the network is kind of responsible. If you see something and it's safe, kind of call it out. There's a lot of work around bystander intervention, and I know you do a lot of training with your organisation, and where that's appropriate and safe, then I think that's really useful. But also, you know, if you see something, report it, or if you experience something, you need to report it, because I think that's the big challenge, and it's not actually that easy sometimes to report. People don't know how or where to report, and I think that's problematic as well.
I was going to say, do all the public transport providers have systems and routes for reporting incidents?
They do, but they're not all the same as well.
Okay, right.
So if you're on the rail, then you've got you can report to British Transport Police. You've got the app, Project Guardian app, that you can use. There's a text number that you can use as well. Nots Trams have a WhatsApp number that people can use.
Right.
They say to kind of let the driver know, and if it's on the tram or the bus network, to kind of let, you know, a member of staff or the driver know, but also report it to the police, because the police need to be aware. When I first did my PhD in Merseyside, I think we looked at the police data. There were 4 records of incidents on buses over a year period.
Right.
And there obviously weren't that many, but that's what was in the system. So if the police think there's no problem, then how are they going to justify dedicating resources in times of austerity to tackling those issues? So it's a...
Are those numbers prominently displayed so that passengers could sort of look at something and know where they can report or who they can contact?
I think with the rail they are, but again, I think probably not on the carriages so much, although a lot of them do display it. I don't know about the trams actually, where the numbers are, so I think maybe that is a really useful thing to think about in terms of how much kind of signage is there, and notification or announcements are there in terms of the different systems for people to know what to
Some
do.
more work around that too.
I think absolutely.
To promote that.
Yeah, I think that certainly could be done.
And you mentioned the bystander training, and you know, we very much, well, we started off around hate crimes, and then obviously, you know, there's a lack of sort of control in terms of what people can do. There's obviously also situations that could be quite dangerous and threatening. So we very much sort of moved away from the hate crime arena and sort of brought it down to more that day-to-day hostility, people just being rude, people just not being very pleasant, mostly in the workplace now. And whenever we talk about bystander interventions, we always talk about safety first. Yeah. You know, your safety is important. And the context that we're really trying to do it is, you know, if you have a colleague that says something that's inappropriate, or even an embarrassing family member that says something inappropriate, but even on public transport where you may see people on a regular basis, there's still a role that people can play, isn't there, in terms of showing disapproval or sort of, you know, even sort of non-verbal sort of facial features that maybe express concern, that can send messages to people. What do you think the role of that could be on public transport?
Yeah, and I think you started off with kind of the really important point, which is your safety first. You don't want to do anything that escalates the situation, but at the same time, you know, if you hear a comment that you think actually that's just not appropriate, you know, it's almost like you're part of the kind of climate that sets the rules for acceptable behaviour. And if the transport policy is very much that we won't accept or tolerate hate crime, we won't accept or tolerate, you know, sexual harassment of not just physical but verbal forms as well, then you know, everyone's kind of got a part to play in doing that. But I think, you know, again, you need to exercise caution in how you do it and where you do it. But I think it, you know, Transport for London are certainly exploring how that can be done and encouraged safely, because, you know, we can't have transport staff all over the whole network 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across the whole coverage, right? So, you know, there has to be ways of thinking about it sensibly. And also, I talked about earlier, sorry, about travelling through unfamiliar environments. So kind of people feel safer are kind of like protecting where they know, or kind of, you know, if you're kind of near your home and you see somebody that you're not familiar with, or in your workplace, you might kind of, are you meant to be here? Why are you kind of here? Whereas when you move further away, and I think that same principle applies on transport, you know, if you're going to be in a very unfamiliar environment with lots of people you don't know, then actually speaking up is really difficult. And sometimes for very good reasons you might not, but you can still report it.
Yeah.
You know, you might even be able to report it on an app.
Yeah.
You know, very discreetly say there's something happening on this journey at this point, because somebody might be able to respond to that. So,
but if you say your neighbour's kids that are 12 or 13, sort of maybe laughing at something that's inappropriate, you know, you'd probably be fairly safe and comfortable to either say something there and then, or go over to them afterwards and say, you know, that wasn't very nice.
And it sets the tone for acceptable behaviour, doesn't it? And
so there's still a sort of a role that we can really play, isn't there? I mean, we say on our training, you know, some of the easiest thing that you can do is those non-verbals, you know, showing that disapproval, or just shaking your head, or taking a bit of a sigh when someone, you know, people pick up on those messages. People also pick up on the lack of those messages. And when those messages aren't there, they think that that's okay.
And it continues to be, and it continues to pay okay.
That's
and
what
it
allows it all to continue.
Escalate, you know. And there's a lot of kind of education around schools that's happening around kind of acceptable behaviour as well. So, you know, there's things that we can do kind of in the short term around lighting, around visible lines of sight, around kind of staffing, around help points. You know, all on their own don't really work, but there's also things we can do in the longer term around kind of, you know, acceptable behaviour. And so I think we need both approaches, and I think that's the challenge, is that it's not like we can just do something and stop. We need to continue the efforts to work in these arenas.
And like you say, I mean, you know, everyone's got a role to play, haven't they? Whether you're a passenger, whether you're providing that service, whether you're sort of, you know, on the fringes of it, there's a role that everyone can play within that.
Yeah. And people see ticket inspectors and sometimes they're a bit like, oh, it's another ticket inspector, but actually they've got a role to play as well.
Yeah.
You know, in their visible staff, as well as, they're not just there for revenue protection, they're also visible presence on the system that helps keep you safe as well. So, you know, sometimes we could probably make their job easier than we do when we're tired and they've asked you for a ticket for the second or third time.
I know. When I was a student, the ticket inspector would come and think, oh no, not that I didn't have a ticket, I did, but just that reaction at that young age.
Yeah.
Now when I see an inspector, I think, oh, I feel safer.
Yeah.
I feel reassured that there's somebody with authority that's here. Okay, so if you had a magic wand and there were 3 things that you could do that could make public transport safer, what would they be?
So I think one would be a kind of single mechanism for kind of collecting all the reports or the incidents, so that we actually had a holistic picture of what's happening, rather than this disparate nature, so that there was one group responsible for policing public transport, or for kind of supporting public transport. So I think that would be one thing. I think I would be finding ways to encourage people on the network who can, they may be staff, they may be members of the public, but I think, you know, that I think when we try and move to more help points and more technology, and, you know, there was talk of stations closing to become Amazon pickups in London at one point, you know, we need to keep people on the network, and I know that's a resource intensive thing, but as much as possible we need to keep people on the network. They'd be 2 of the things. I think the third would just be to kind of think about actually transport sustainable. It's environmentally friendly, it's better than driving everywhere, and you know, the more of us that actually use transport, and the more reliable it is, probably the more safer it feels. You know, it should be a collective community thing. You know, it should be an extension of our community to get around and be kind of social mobility, and, you know, in that kind of utopian world we might actually have that, but, you know, there are environmental benefits to using transport. So if we invest more money in it, and if we use the system, then hopefully it becomes more sustainable as well. That would be my third sort of thought.
Great. Thank you very much then. Thank you very much, Andy, for coming and sharing your thoughts around public transport and safety and how it can be better.
Thank you very much for the invite. I really enjoyed it.